More than 2,500 years ago, among the mountains and deserts of the Iranian plateau, a relatively unknown people began building something the ancient world had never seen. Within a single century, the Persians would rule from the borders of India to the shores of the Mediterranean. Their empire would contain dozens of nations, hundreds of languages, and nearly half the population of the known world. They built roads across continents, carried water through deserts, and created an administrative system so effective that later conquerors would simply copy it. Their greatest king freed prisoners, restored temples, and was remembered by conquered peoples not as a destroyer, but as a liberator. Yet today, Persia is often remembered only as the enemy defeated by Greece. But Persia was far more than that. It was the world's first true superpower. So how did a scattered collection of tribes rise to command the largest empire history had ever seen? And how did that empire eventually fall to a young Macedonian king named Alexander? This is the complete history of ancient Persia. Long before there was a Persian Empire, the Iranian plateau was already home to ancient civilizations. It was a harsh and dramatic landscape. Mountain ranges surrounded fertile valleys. Vast deserts divided communities. Summers could be unbearably hot, while winters in the highlands were bitterly cold. But the plateau also occupied one of the most important positions in the ancient world. To the west lay Mesopotamia, home of Sumer, Babylon, and Assyria. To the east lay Central Asia and the Indian subcontinent. Trade routes, armies, and migrating peoples had crossed this land for thousands of years. One of its earliest major civilizations was Elam. Centered around the ancient city of Susa, the Elamites built temples, created writing systems, and developed sophisticated forms of administration long before the Persians appeared. They traded with Mesopotamia, fought against its kings, and sometimes invaded its cities. But by the first millennium BC, Elam was weakening. Repeated Assyrian invasions devastated its territory, burned its cities, and shattered its political power. Into this changing world came new peoples from the Eurasian steppe. They spoke Indo-Iranian languages and brought traditions shaped by migration, livestock, horsemanship, and warfare. Among them were two groups destined to change history. The Medes settled in the north. The Persians settled farther south, in the region later known as Persis. At first, the Persians were insignificant. Assyrian records described them as scattered tribes living in the mountains, occasionally paying tribute in horses, cattle, and precious goods. They had no great cities, no vast armies, no empire, but they were learning from every civilization around them. From the Elamites, they absorbed traditions of government and kingship. From Mesopotamia, they encountered writing and monumental architecture. From their own nomadic ancestors, they retained mobility, loyalty to clan leaders, and an extraordinary ability to adapt. Then, in the 6th century BC, one Persian ruler transformed these scattered tribes into a force that would conquer the ancient world. His name was Cyrus. Cyrus became king of a small Persian kingdom around 559 BC. At the time, the Persians lived under the shadow of the Median Empire. According to later Greek stories, Cyrus was the grandson of the Median king Astyages, who had once dreamed that the child would overthrow him. Astyages supposedly ordered the infant killed, but Cyrus survived. Whether this story is true or legend, the ending was real. Cyrus rebelled. Median nobles defected to his side, and around 550 BC, Astyages was defeated. The Median capital of Ecbatana fell, and Cyrus became ruler of both the Persians and the Medes. But he did not destroy the people he had conquered. Instead, he brought Median nobles into his government and adopted elements of their court culture. It was a pattern Cyrus would repeat again and again. He understood something many conquerors did not. Fear could win a kingdom, but cooperation could hold an empire together. Cyrus next turned west toward Lydia, one of the richest kingdoms in the ancient world. Its king, Croesus, was so wealthy that his name became a symbol of unimaginable riches. Believing Persia could be defeated, Croesus crossed into Persian territory. According to Herodotus, he had consulted the Oracle of Delphi and was told that if he attacked Persia, a great empire would fall. The prophecy was correct, but the empire that fell was his own. Cyrus marched rapidly across Anatolia, defeated the Lydians, and captured their capital, Sardis, in 546 BC. Persia now controlled Western Asia Minor and the wealthy Greek cities of the Ionian coast. But Cyrus's greatest conquest still lay ahead. Babylon was one of the most magnificent cities on earth. Its massive walls enclosed temples, palaces, and streets built by generations of kings. At its center stood the cult of Marduk, the city's chief god. But Babylon's ruler, Nabonidus, had alienated powerful priests and spent years away from the capital. Cyrus recognized his opportunity. In 539 BC, Persian forces defeated the Babylonian army at Opis. Soon afterward, Babylon opened its gates. Cyrus entered without destroying the city. In the famous Cyrus Cylinder, he portrayed himself not as a foreign conqueror, but as the chosen ruler of Marduk, a king who had arrived to restore order. Temples were reopened, religious images were returned, displaced peoples were allowed to go home. Among them were Jewish communities exiled after the Babylonian conquest of Jerusalem. The Hebrew Bible would remember Cyrus as an anointed ruler, chosen by God to release the exiles and allow the rebuilding of their temple. Cyrus's tolerance was not modern democracy or human rights in the way we understand them today. It was also practical politics, but it was still extraordinary. Instead of forcing dozens of nations to become Persian, Cyrus allowed them to remain themselves, provided they accepted his authority. By the time he died around 530 BC, probably while campaigning in Central Asia, Cyrus had created the largest empire the world had ever known. His body was returned to Pasargadae. There, in the capital he had founded, he was buried inside a simple stone tomb. The man who ruled countless cities rested in a monument almost completely without decoration. But the empire he created was anything but simple. And after his death, its survival was far from guaranteed. Cyrus was succeeded by his son, Cambyses. Cambyses inherited an empire stretching across Asia, but one great power still remained independent: Egypt. In 525 BC, Persian forces crossed the Sinai and defeated the Egyptian army near Pelusium. Memphis fell soon afterward, and Cambyses assumed the title of pharaoh. For the first time, Egypt, Babylon, Lydia, Media, and Persia were ruled by one king. But Cambyses' reputation remains controversial. Greek writers accused him of madness, cruelty, and disrespect toward Egyptian religion. They claimed he killed the sacred Apis bull and mocked ancient rituals. Egyptian evidence presents a more complicated picture, suggesting he also participated in traditional ceremonies. The truth may lie somewhere between propaganda and reality. Whatever happened in Egypt, disaster was unfolding in Persia. A man claiming to be Cambyses' brother Bardia seized the throne. Cambyses began the journey home, but died before reaching Persia. The empire was now leaderless, divided, and on the edge of collapse. Then another ruler emerged. His name was Darius. Darius was not the obvious heir to Cyrus. He belonged to another branch of the Persian royal family. According to Darius's own account, the man on the throne was not the real Bardia. but an impostor, a priest named Gaumata. Darius and 6 Persian nobles killed him in 522 BC. But almost immediately, rebellion erupted across the empire. Babylon revolted, Media revolted, Elam revolted. Local leaders proclaimed themselves kings, and for nearly 2 years, Darius fought to survive. His victories were recorded in the Behistun inscription, carved high into a cliff in western Iran. The monument shows Darius standing over defeated rebels while declaring that Ahura Mazda, the supreme god, had granted him victory. But Darius knew military victories alone would not preserve the empire. Persia needed a system. He divided the empire into provinces called satrapies. Each was governed by a satrap responsible for collecting taxes, maintaining order, and raising troops. But to prevent governors becoming too powerful, separate officials monitored their activities. Royal inspectors, known as the king's eyes and ears, traveled across the empire, reporting directly to Darius. Taxes were standardized. Weights and measures were regulated. A gold coin called the daric helped connect distant markets. Egypt supplied grain. India sent gold. Central Asian provinces provided horses. Babylon contributed silver. The empire's diversity became the source of its wealth. But its greatest challenge was distance. An order sent from the royal court could take months to reach the frontier. So Darius expanded an ancient network of routes into the royal road. It stretched roughly 2,500 kilometers from Susa to Sardis. Relay stations provided couriers with fresh horses, allowing royal messages to cross enormous distances with astonishing speed. The road carried more than government orders. Merchants, soldiers, diplomats, and travelers moved along it, connecting cultures that had once been separated by mountains and deserts. Persian engineers also built bridges, canals, and underground water channels known as qanats. These tunnels carried groundwater from mountains into dry settlements while limiting evaporation beneath the desert sun. Without qanats, many Persian communities could never have survived. Without roads, the empire could never have functioned. And without administration, it would have broken apart. Persia had become more than conquered territory. It had become a machine capable of ruling continents. To display the empire's power, Darius began constructing a new ceremonial capital, Persepolis. Built upon a vast stone terrace, its palaces rose above the plains of southern Persia. Materials and craftsmen arrived from across the empire. Stonecutters came from Anatolia. Goldsmiths came from Egypt and Media. Timber arrived from distant forests. Babylonian workers produced bricks, while artisans from other provinces carved reliefs and decorated royal halls. Persepolis was designed to make a statement. Persia did not merely control many peoples, it brought them together. On the walls of the Apadana audience hall, delegations from across the empire were carved in stone. Babylonians carried vessels. Lydians brought jewelry. Indians offered precious goods. Ethiopians carried ivory. They are not shown chained or humiliated. They walk in orderly processions, wearing their own clothing and carrying the products of their homelands. It was propaganda, certainly. Persian rule was still maintained by armies and force. But the message was unmistakable. Every nation had a place within the empire, as long as every nation recognized the King of Kings. Under Darius, Persia reached from the Indus Valley to Egypt and into southeastern Europe. But expansion into the Greek world would bring the empire into its most famous conflict. The struggle began in the Greek cities of Asia Minor. In 499 BC, several revolted against Persian rule, receiving limited assistance from Athens. The revolt was eventually crushed, but Darius decided Athens must be punished. In 490 BC, a Persian expedition crossed the Aegean and landed at Marathon. The Athenians were badly outnumbered, yet their heavily armed hoplites charged across the plain, broke the Persian center, and drove the invaders back to their ships. For Persia, Marathon was a failed expedition on the distant edge of a gigantic empire. For Athens, it became a legendary victory. Darius died before he could launch another invasion. The task passed to his son Xerxes. In 480 BC, Xerxes assembled a massive multinational force. Persian engineers built pontoon bridges across the Hellespont, linking Asia and Europe. A canal was cut through the Athos Peninsula to protect the fleet from dangerous waters. At Thermopylae, a small Greek force led by King Leonidas delayed the Persian advance before being surrounded and destroyed. Xerxes marched south and captured Athens, but the city had been evacuated. The decisive clash came at sea. The Athenian commander Themistocles lured the Persian fleet into the narrow straits of Salamis. Crowded together and unable to maneuver, Persian ships were attacked by the smaller Greek fleet. The defeat threatened Xerxes' supply lines, forcing him to withdraw much of his army. The following year, the remaining Persian forces were defeated at Plataea. Greece had survived, but Persia had not collapsed. The empire remained immensely wealthy and powerful for more than a century. Its kings continued influencing Greek politics, financing one city against another, and recovering control through diplomacy where invasion had failed. Yet beneath the surface, a more dangerous problem was growing. The empire's size was becoming harder to control. Later, Persian kings faced court conspiracies, rebellions, and increasingly powerful satraps. Egypt repeatedly broke away. Royal successions were sometimes settled through assassination. And although Persia remained formidable, its enemies were changing. To the west, the Kingdom of Macedonia had transformed into a military power under Philip II. After Philip's assassination, his young son inherited the throne, Alexander. In 334 BC, Alexander crossed into Asia with a hardened Macedonian army. He defeated Persian forces at the Granicus River. Then, at Issus, he defeated King Darius III himself. Darius escaped, gathered another enormous army, and confronted Alexander near Gaugamela in 331 BC. The Persians possessed more soldiers, but Alexander's army was experienced, disciplined, and commanded with extraordinary precision. A gap opened in the Persian line. Alexander charged directly toward Darius. The Persian king fled. The battle was lost. Babylon surrendered. Susa opened its gates. Then Alexander marched into Persepolis. The ceremonial heart of Persia was plundered, and its palaces were consumed by fire. Whether the burning was deliberate revenge, a drunken act, or a political statement remains disputed. But its symbolism was unmistakable. The empire Cyrus had created was dying. Darius III was later murdered by one of his own commanders while fleeing east. Alexander punished the killers and gave Darius a royal funeral. Then he did something remarkable. He began adopting Persian customs. He wore elements of Persian dress. He retained Persian officials. He married into the Persian royal family and encouraged his officers to do the same. Alexander had conquered the Persian Empire, but to rule it, he had to become increasingly Persian. The Achaemenid Persian Empire lasted for a little more than 2 centuries, yet its influence survived long after Alexander. It created a model for governing diverse populations across enormous distances. It connected continents through roads and commerce. It developed systems of provincial administration, taxation, and communication that later empires would imitate. Its architecture brought together artistic traditions from Egypt, Mesopotamia, Anatolia, and Central Asia. Its kings demonstrated that cultural tolerance could be a tool of power more effective than destruction. Persia was not a perfect empire. It conquered through violence, suppressed rebellion, and demanded tribute from subject nations. But it was also one of the ancient world's most innovative civilizations. Cyrus showed that a conqueror could preserve rather than destroy. Darius demonstrated that administration could be as powerful as an army. And Persepolis revealed an imperial vision in which dozens of cultures could exist inside one political system. Alexander destroyed the Persian dynasty, but he did not destroy the Persian idea. The empire's rulers vanished, its palaces burned, its armies disappeared. Yet the system Persia created continued shaping the world for centuries. Persia had fallen, but its legacy had only just begun.